G'day, folks. It's a coach here, and this is not a faction focus. It's something a little bit special. We're going to kick off, and I couldn't be happier to have my first guest on the new series. We are talking Soulblight, and the man who needs no introduction. It is the Lord of Death, the man who encompasses everything that is Nagash. I'm pretty sure he might have taught Nagash necromancy. It is Deke, straight out of Grand Alliance Death. How are you today, Deke?
Yeah, pretty good, mate. Thank you for having me on the show again.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. You are obviously on the faction-focused Legions of Nagash, and we've been talking a little bit lately around some of the Legions of Nagash and that book, and potentially one of the most underrated, underappreciated, but one of the most awesome allegiances that are in the mortal realms, and that is Soulblight. So you and I have been talking a lot, and this is going to be a really cool discussion, I'd like to think anyway, about the Soulblight allegiance. You know, who are they? What are they all about? How do I start collecting this? And why would I want to move over from one of the Grand Alliance, not Grand Alliances, the Legions into Soulblight? Does that sound pretty cool?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Sounds
Soulblight
good.
are a very cool army. Yep.
So, let's start the book, right? Like, I've got my Legions of Nagash. It's a book that I've read a lot. You know, I've been reading about my Grand Host and my Legions of Night and Blood, and then I look at some of the spells that I can get, and then I quickly go to the back with my units and all that stuff. But there's a couple of pages between Legion of Night and unit selection that people probably miss, and that is Soulblight. So, who are they? Who are the Soulblight?
Soulblight are basically the vampires of Age of Sigmar. Much like you'd expect, superhuman strength, speed. They're basically death. They're undead, but they can pass as humans. They have none of the frailties of the lesser undead. But they do pay a price. They have to live off blood. They have to drink blood. They're a little bit different to your normal vampires, though. Garlic won't affect them. A stake through the heart won't slay them. Running water doesn't worry them. Even sunlight, it makes them feel a bit uncomfortable, but they can deal with it. Just call up a cloud of bats, and they're like, "Yeah, cool, got my darkness, don't care." So a little bit different to your normal average vampire, and it's not just your standard Nosferatu vampire. There's many different types of Soulblight creatures. Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of really exciting piece, is that for me, I really like vampires. I've played the role-playing game Vampire Masquerade. You and I, so, for people who may have watched this channel, I speak about Deke a lot. And that's because Deke and I started Warhammer Fantasy Battles when we were kids. We were really young. I actually got Deke in, so I like to think that I'm the head vampire in the Warhammer relationship. And Deke has infected many, many hobbyists. Truly a wonderful painter, a wonderful player, just an overall good sport. But there's lots of different ways to build the vampire counts, or the vampires in general. You've got that old fantasy battles that you and I got familiar with. You got that Elizabethan vampires. You've got I'm trying to think. The names just kind of dropped out of me. All the different movie type vampires.
Your stereotypical sort of ones. Yeah.
Nosferatu was the name I was thinking.
Yeah.
But like, for when I look at the rules and the limited lore that I read, there's all this space to explore. I think you just said, you're not pigeonholed into one particular vampire. There's a lot of cool different rules, a lot of cool different models, and you can build a vampire army the way that you want to build it, because there's a space to create that.
Yeah, there's very, very many opportunities to create your narrative, especially with the Mortal Realms now. Like, you can have a Soulblight army themed from a specific realm. You can have a bestial sort of vampire army from Gur, or you can have just your shadow vampires, or just your the stock standard vampires from Shyish. That sort of thing.
Well, you could even go into the very traditional vampires that, who are living in shadow in the cities. Now that we have cities of Sigmar, you could have a Hammerhall, a Tempest Eye type vampire coven who are either a cult, or maybe they sit outside, and there's all these different relationships, and you could pull from that lore, and you could pull from those models to make it.
Yeah, definitely. well, definitely with Cities of Sigma, like that's something that's still carried over from the old world. Is Neff Errata has definitely got her, well, she does have her vampire spies in amongst the different cities. She's still got a spy network. She prides herself on knowing everything. Knowledge is power, that sort of thing. Being like 10 steps ahead of the enemy, knowing what they're going to do before they do. Yeah.
Yeah, so, which is awesome, right? You know, regardless of how you want to build your vampires are cool, first and foremost. And then however you want to build your vampires, whether it is, you know, based around Neff Errata, whether it's based around, you know, that more traditional Von Carstein with Manfred and pulling together from some of the older style models, there's something for everyone, which I really like.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So what drew you to them? So why did you start Soulblight? Why is this an army that you really enjoy and you've taken to tournaments, and you know you've got a really extensive range, and we'll show some of your photos in a minute.
Oh.
But you know, like you spend a lot of time painting death and playing with death. So what drew you to Soulblight, and why do you love it so much?
To answer that, we have to go back a little bit of time. Like as you said, you got me into fantasy battles. And the army I started off was Warhammer Armies Undead. And one of the first heroes I bought for that army was the classic Vampire Lord on a horse. I think he was known as the Red Duke. And that's something I sort of went with. And as time went on, they released vampire counts in fantasy battles, and always thought how amazing would it be to actually not have to bother taking skeletons and zombies or your lesser undead. It'd be great to field a pure vampire army. And in particular, my favorite has always been the knightly order of vampires known as the Blood Dragon back in the day. And I think it was the second Vampire Counts army book that came out for fantasy battles actually had a back of the book army where you could field an army of vampire or a very knightly order themed army for vampires. And then when Age of Sigmar came out, lo and behold, what did they do? Allowed me to take a pure army of vampires with the Soulblight allegiance. Now, originally, they didn't have Legions of Nagash. You just had Soulblight, and you could field still an army of Soulblight with Blood Knights as troops if your vampire lord was
I remember you and I would play in the early days of Age of Sigmar, and you would have 25, 35, you know, this fleet of just vampires on horses, these Blood Knights. And, you know, this it was essentially like the first iteration of like the tide that Deepkin have. Like, you know, instead of having all these Morsar eels at you, it was just this wave of vampires, and it was glorious. As frustrating as it was for a Free Cities player, it was glorious and kind of what I would expect from an army of vampires.
Yeah, that's right. So and definitely when Legions of Nagash came out and they actually had an actual allegiance at the back of the book, I thought that was amazing. I could actually, you know, have a bit of fun with my army and get some extra bonus rules with it as well. Some little tools to make them a little bit different to other armies. So yeah, it was pretty good. Basically, though, like just I love vampires, and the whole idea for me, what personally was the martial prowess, the vampire knight. You know, got centuries or eternal life to hone their skills to get better in combat. I thought that was pretty cool, like a dark nobility, you know. So that's basically my sort of attraction to the army. But all the vampires are cool in general, and I'm talking about vampiric horror, the gothic horror of the vampires, not your sparkling in the sunlight sort of vampires.
I certainly don't want. I mean, look, if you want to do a Twilight themed vampire army, don't at me on Twitter, but yeah, like, you know, whatever you like, you know, I love Queen of the Damned and obviously Interview with the Vampire Slayer. I love, you know, Lestat and this music, and you know, partially because my favorite band is Korn, and you know, they got to do the music and the voices. But you know, like these bardic, you know, there's all these different ways to build out vampires. And however you want to build it, or you know, what type of models you want to bring, and you know, there's just a wonderful space for conversion, for painting, and the play style is quite cool as well. Something a little bit old world, but certainly not rank and file, and it's very much Age of Sigmar orientated.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. So it's a very elite army.
Yeah, and actually, funnily enough, you kind of alluded to what my next question, which was going to be, why would you actually want to collect Soulblight? And the great news is, at least from my side of the fence, is that it's not a brand new army. If I've been collecting Legions of Nagash, I've probably already got half the models. So for me, it's an easy kind of like pivot a little bit to try something different. But why would I want to play and start collecting and building out a Soulblight army, in your opinion?
As I was saying, it's a very elite army, very low model count. It's very fast, very hard hitting. They are absolute monsters in combat. They're great in combat, lots of attacks, lots of damage. They heal. It's just a very nice change to you're not pushing around 40 units of 40 models. So it's a very, very fast and fun army to play, I find. Everything's pretty rock hard and solid as well. So no, it's a very fun army to play.
And that's probably how I kind of got burnt out. I played Legion of Night for a good 9 to 12 months. And I kind of got burnt out playing with big blocks of skeletons or chain rafts or zombies and I got to play with some direwolves as well. But the constant mechanic of regeneration with the grave sites and, having to be wholly within X and being next to a necromancer and like all the buffs, like it got to a point where it was a bit too much for me, having to move around these hordes and then having all the synergies. And obviously, while synergies are across every army, it sounds like Soulblight isn't tied down to that the gravesite mechanic, which allows you to do so much more.
That's correct. Yeah, you don't have grave sites in a Soulblight army. You actually have very few like summonable Soulblight with the summonable keyword. As I like to call them, they're not the lesser undead. They're all the more elite stuff. So you've got I think the only things that are summonable in that army are actually the Fellbats and Bat Swarms. So you don't really need grave sites in that army at all, and your heroes can heal those units anyway. With the vampire, I think it's invocation of death rule.
So it sounds like you get the best of both worlds, right? You get to be able to heal, but on the flip side, you're not tied down to having to be near your grave sites. And because once a death player puts down a grave site near me, I know that their strategy is going to revolve around those 4 points on the board. Maybe there's 3 points and they're trying to decoy me with one of those. But I know that, what I want to do is I want to try to get on top of those grave sites and block up as much summonable or regeneration as possible. But Soulblight's not locked into that. They've got the movement, they've got the durability, they've got the manipulation of the board, and they've got some great pieces.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So as you said, they're quite a fast army as well. To get where they need to be. In saying that as well, like some people might see as not having grave sites as a downside, but your heroes have got your units have got lots of wounds. They're pretty hard to kill. They heal themselves, and as well, like your Blood Knights, for example, they've got a 4-up save. If the enemy has no rend, they've got a 3-up save, and they've got 3 wounds apiece. So they're pretty nasty. They should survive a fair bit.
Yeah, I mean, we know what a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon with an Ethereal Amulet does. Like, that's just like a staple of durability. Now imagine all your other characters and also, some other things like that. It's pretty cool as opposed to just running around with a bunch of skeletons and zombies. So
yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
that's why I really like it. So if I'm going to go Grand Alliance Soulblight, so I'm choosing to forfeit Night, Blood, Sacrament, Grief, Grand Host. It is in my Legions of Nagash book, so it is a page there. I think it's page 72. What do I get for my buck? What do I get for swearing allegiance to the Soulblight?
All right, so what you get by playing a Soulblight allegiance is probably the best thing is you get to pick a bloodline. Now, if you used to play fantasy battles and you played vampire counts, this might sound very familiar to you. When you had a vampire, you had to pick a bloodline that all your vampires belong to. Now, this is a throwback to that, bit of a nod at those bloodlines. Now, you just pick one for your entire every Soulblight unit in your army gets the ability or gets the bonuses of these bloodlines. Did you want me to go through some of those?
I can go through
the other one as well. Well, before we go through them, I'll tell you what else you get for it. You also get the deathless save that all death get as well. It's being within 6 inches of a hero or the general.
So I don't lose that deathless ability. So I don't get my grave sights, but I still get to keep my deathless, which is still a very important part of death armies.
Correct. Yeah, it's identical. It's identical to the other Legions of Nagash ones. Yeah, it's not wholly within; it's just within. Yeah.
Okay, so that's really cool, especially if you're going to have big long lines of Blood Knights. Being wholly within 6 can be very tough with that. I imagine. Definitely. So that's great. So I don't have to be wholly within, just within 6. And you get this thing called Bloodlines. So I'll read out the Bloodlines. I've got it up here. It might make life easier. But as I read them through, so there's 4 different options. Maybe, Deke, you can give me some advice or at least some high-level concepts of, what this actually means and like what does an army look like from this particular bloodline. Because I remember the old Vampire Count Bloodlines. But then, looking through things like Vampire the Masquerade RPG, looking at the different movies about vampires, they're not all this one cookie cutter vampire. There's all these different types of bloodlines or different types of vampires, and this kind of reflects it for me. So there's four options. One is the Dragon Warriors. So the Dragon Warriors, you can re-roll hit rolls of 1 for models that have the Dragon Bloodline, the Dragon Warrior Bloodline, if they charge in the same turn.
Yep. So that's sort of Dragon Warriors. It's sort of like the old Blood Dragon, close combat sort of thing. That's effective, very effective for like your Vargeist and your Blood Knights, just to make them hit a lot harder in combat. Rerolling 1s. Most of your units will hit on 3s, so rerolling 1s on the charge, that's pretty good. That's you'd want to make sure you're charging to get the best use out of that. It only works on the charge. But in saying that, it might not be the best sometimes to take that. There's the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon. His command ability is just reroll to hit anyway, so you might be better off using that elsewhere or picking a different bloodline. But that's not bad. That's particularly good if you're not going to take a Vampire Lord on a Zombie Dragon.
Well, it keeps you...
Or a Coven Throne for that as well. So,
I guess for me, the benefits to this is that this is a command point that people are spending to generate those ones, and it allows units to act independently away from heroes as well. So
that's true. Yep.
I mean, that's an option, but if there are other options, and we'll obviously go through the options, but the reason I wanted to go through these options is as we look at some of the units, and Deke, he's been very kind to share with me one of his, most successful lists. We can kind of put a bit of context on the units and go, well, if I am going to build one that's based around charging to get that benefit, what are the things that are best at that? So the second option that we have is the Lords of Night, and that's going to allow you models within the Lords of Night bloodline receive the benefits of the Deathless Thralls, which is our Deathless Minions, our 6-up additional save.
Deathless save.
Yep. Even if they're not within 6 inches of the general or another friendly Soulblight hero, so everyone's going to always get the 6-up.
Yeah. So this is one of my favorites. I rate this one quite highly. Now in a Soulblight army, as I said, it's a very elite army. You'll find it's also quite small. Now you're not going to be having a lot of points to spend on lots of characters. Now, this is a great bloodline ability to take if you don't want to have to babysit your units with a hero. Sometimes it's great to just have your Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon sort of fly off on his own. You don't want your army to be so clustered together. Sometimes you want to be able to capture those other points on the board and not have them all hanging out in the same sort of area together. So, yeah, I think it's quite a good one. Yeah, I like that ability very much.
Yeah, I like the independence that allows you to have, because one of the great memes of Age of Sigmar is shoot the heroes, and if you are able to take out a hero quickly, death armies crumble pretty quickly. So
very much,
So that allows you to at least mitigate as much damage as possible by not having to worry about where your heroes are for your 6-up Deathless save.
Yeah, 100%. Yep.
The third one is the Necromantic, which adds one to casting and unbind rolls for wizards with the necromantic bloodline. In addition, subtract 1 from the bravery characteristics of enemy units that are within 6 inches of one or more models with the bloodline. So there's a double benefit there.
Bad. Yeah, it's not bad. Especially good if you've got a few endless spells up your sleeve as well. In particular, where this also combos really well is a nice little synergy. If you've got units of Blood Knights, if you've got a fair few units of Blood Knights in your army, this will combo really well with their banner. So most enemy units will be at -2 to their bravery. So yeah, pretty good. And when you hit them, more often than not, if you're hitting a unit with a unit of Blood Knights, you're going to be taking a fair few casualties. So that -2 bravery is going to go a long way.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Obviously, it's very challenging to get people to battle shock these days. But there are a bunch of endless spells out there that can also provide negative to bravery. It's probably worth noting that it's only a +1 to the casting and unbinding roll, not to the dispelling roll. So if you try to dispel an endless spell, you don't get a plus there, but you will get a chance to cast or dispel in that turn.
Yeah, 100%. Yep. Being a bit of an older book, it doesn't have that benefit.
Yeah, so it's not going to impact it at an endless spell that was cast 2 or 3 turns ago.
Correct.
And then the final one, and probably one of my favorite ones, is just, for me, this is the Soulblight, at least in my imagination, and that is Swift Death. So add 2 to the movement characteristic of all models that have the Swift Death bloodline. In addition, those models can fly. So their movement always counts as fly. So
that's probably the best bloodline ability for Soulblight, in my opinion anyway. I think it's also the most competitive one to field for your army as well. Having Blood Knights being able to fly +2 to their move, that's amazing. When you can charge over the top of screens, it's really good. The other benefit to that as well is you take a Vampire Lord on a steed, get the extra 2 attacks, and he can still fly rather than just taking him on foot with wings. So not bad at all.
I think it's great. I mean, like, I play Tempest Eye in Cities of Sigmar, and one of the greatest benefits that gives me is +3 movement in the first turn. You get +2 movement every turn. So that's essentially a free chronomatic cogs, or you could double that up with a chronomatic cogs to get +4 movement and fly. And then you start thinking but then you start thinking of the other synergies that can kind of come in, and it makes it a really tasty option. And I think as you start thinking about, the re-rolling ones to hit, whether it's a 6-up Deathless save, anywhere on the board, whether it's going to be, there's a whole bunch of things here that you go, right, I really like the idea of this rule. How do I build around it? Or how do I get the most out of the charge, the high movement, which I think is really cool, at least.
Yeah, it's already a fast army, and makes it faster again. No, it's a great one. I'll go into that one a bit more later on. As well, when we talk about like army lists and stuff.
I think the list that you've sent me is an example of this, but again, you put your own flavor on it, and I think it's got variety as well. While it is a smaller part of the book, there is still some tasty variety for Soulblight.
100%. Don't net list, make your own list. Come up with your own design. But I'm hoping that list will provide a bit of inspiration for people who may be finding the Allegiance a bit challenging, or maybe want to start it. But I guess we can talk about that a bit more later.
And it might be worth calling out before I show off some of Deke's amazing models and talk through some of the units that are sitting in Soulblight. You do get some unique command traits as well. So you've got some artifacts that are available to you. You've got some command traits that are specific to the Soulblight legions as well. So you're not missing out there. You're still getting some good stuff.
Yeah, there's some really good ones in there too. In particular, one of the command traits that you can take is Mist Form. That's probably one of the best ones. You can give it to your general, and he can actually retreat and still charge. That's pissed me off.
Deke and I played a few times, and that's pissed me off. So Mist Form, if the general retreats, they move as if they can fly, and they can still charge in the same turn. So if they retreat, they can still charge. So I know Gloomspite Gits have something like that called like Fight Another Day. So you're in combat and then you kind of bounce out. This is like the opposite. Yep. You retreat and then you kind of go in somewhere else. So
very useful. especially for a zombie vampire lord and zombie dragon.
You're chipping at it. You're like, I want to get it down, and then the minute it starts getting wounded, it's like, bye.
Yeah.
Your +2 movement as well, and like, ah. But there's some pretty cool stuff, adding +1 to the attack characteristic, wound rolls of 6+ from the general, inflict a mortal wound in addition. At the start of the combat phase, pick one enemy hero within 3. Until the end of that phase, subtract 1 from the hit roll. So there's a whole bunch of other stuff in there as well. So there's some pretty cool artifacts, some pretty cool command traits as well that you can pick to make your general more flavorful.
Yeah, 100%. Yep.
So
create your own vampire.
It's like, it does feel like that a little bit. Hey, like, choose your own vampire, make it up the way you want to make it up. And you were really kind to share some examples of some of your hobby. In fact, I just skipped to the very end. Let's go to the top. Let's actually talk about building out a force. So talk to me a little bit about your army. Talk to me a little bit about the Legion. So the Soulblight army. So what's to my left? Where do I start?
All right, well, let's talk about the units that you've got on the screen there. So probably the first one we've got there is actually Prince Vaudrey. He's actually in your bit of your narrative and background of the Soulblight. He's actually one of the most skilled and powerful of the Blood Knights. Now during the time of Chaos, when Archaon and Nagash had their big battle, and unfortunately Nagash was defeated in that one. Vaudrey actually tried to leave Nagash for dead, tried to actually throw his remains to the Chaos Gods through a corrupted realm gate. And he failed in that. The other Mortarks managed to retrieve Nagash and spirit him away to safety in one of the underworlds. But when Nagash was reformed, healed, whatever, resurrected, we'll go with that.
You always said reforged. Sigmar saved Nagash.
No, I avoided that one.
No, I noticed you tried.
So basically, Nagash punished Vaudrey. He still wanted to make use of his special skills of slaughtering many enemies, but he bound him basically to his Crimson Keep, and it's a little bit interesting. And this Crimson Keep will actually appear wherever death magic blows at its strongest, and he and his Blood Knight retinue will ride forth. They basically have a single day to ride forth to leave the keep and kill and maim and drink their fill before they have to return. And then the keep disappears again. It's a little bit interesting. It's a pretty cool bit of lore. Interesting. I might as well point out his dragon as well. His dragon is Shortamere. It's a little bit more powerful than your normal zombie dragon as well. So he's got a little bit of an attachment to that dragon. But yeah, he's a pretty cool character. He's brand new for Age of Sigmar as well. He wasn't around in the Fancy Battles days, so it's cool to see something come out for Soulblight that's unique for Age of Sigmar.
And it's probably worth calling out as well that Prince Vaudrey is from the same kit that your Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon's from, which is a start collecting model, or you can buy it independently. It's an alternative sculpt, so you essentially change over the head and the weapon to create Prince Vaudrey. So I think it's great versatility for a range that you might want to buy 2 start collecting boxes.
Yeah, that's right. And the parts that I've used to make mine there, I did a bit of a cheeky reposition of the Zombie Dragon. I've used a Knight of Shroud sword, used some spare parts from a leftover Manfred model from the Mortark kit. So you can sort of, because he's a named character, you can convert him up a bit or spend a bit more time just making him look a little bit different to make him stand out. But very easy to do so with just that same kit.
I imagine Death players are going to recognize the 2 people to the right. They might recognize them. Well, they might recognize one of them. At least one of them people like to ignore for some reason. They hate him because he brought on the end times or destroyed the old world. But what do we got? Well, who are these next 2 people next?
All right, in the middle there, we've got Neff Errata. the Queen of Blood, the Mortarch of Blood. She's a very important character to Soulblight because she was actually the first vampire. Now, you can't talk about Soulblight without talking about the old world as well. Basically, she had the help of Arcan to try and recreate Nagash's elixir of eternal life, and that's what made Nagash what he was, a true immortal. Although when they attempted to make it, they botched it up. They made some errors, and instead, what Neff Errata turned into was the very first vampire. And she actually gave that gift onto her favoured retainers, her generals and other nobles in her court. But basically, all the other bloodlines, they all sort of stem from her in some way or another. So yeah, she's a very old character, and it's great to see her still around in Age of Sigmar. Funny enough, she rules a part of Shyish, one of the underworlds, and the city's called New Lamia, named after the original city of vampires, Lamia, in the old world, in Neakara. It's a bit of cool lore that you can read up on her. She's got a fair few novels that have been released. She's got 2 Neff Errata books from Black Library. And in those, actually, it's got we were talking about how you can make up your own Soulblight army. Well, one of the ideas that you could do is go off a bit of inspiration from those, where she's actually got a female knightly order of blood knights. And they were all the orphan daughters from a city that was destroyed by the forces of chaos. And they're led by a castellan called Adhema. She also shows up in one of the books called Spirit Shadows as well. So she's a pretty cool character. But yeah, you could create your own all-female army of vampires or Soulblight under her. That's actually something that you used to see a lot of back in the day. Although these days, Neff Errata is not so sexist. She will actually have male vampires fighting for her now.
Whatever floats your boat. Whatever floats your boat.
That's right. So yeah, you're not sort of restricted now. So you can have a bit of a mix of different types of vampires fighting under her, but you can still stick to that old theme if you want to. But yeah, she's very cool.
And then what about the gentleman? Right? What about the gentleman on the right? Probably the best Mortarch that Nagash has ever or will ever appoint. It is
Manfred von Carstein. Now, he's a bit of an infamous fellow. He, as you mentioned before, he's actually responsible for bringing about the end times that destroyed the world that was. He was manipulated by the Chaos Gods and manipulated using his own selfishness to do that. But we've got him to thank for Age of Sigmar now, which is wonderful.
Thanks, Manfred. Thank you, Manfred.
That's right.
Much love to you, Manfred.
He's basically one of these characters that you could only trust him as far as you could throw him. He's very treacherous, always looking out for himself. But unfortunately, he's very much under the thumb of Nagash. As much as he hates it, all Soulblight vampires, as much as they like to think that they've got free will, at the end of the day, they all answer to Nagash, and they know that they can get snuffed out like a candle if he so wills it. So they're all very careful to make sure their own little schemes and little plots that they come up with don't outstretch too far or overstep themselves in regards to Nagash. Sorry.
One of my favourite parts. So I used to play Legion of Night, which is the Manfred Legion, and one of my favourite things. I always ran Manfred. And one of the things that I really love about Manfred is that he plays his War Scroll plays like he is in the story. He's not a tank. He's not a tank. He's not going to run into the middle of the battlefield and be a heroic vampire lord on Zombie Dragon. he is a very cunning, very manipulative. He is somebody that will attack at the strategic weak point, and he'll bide his time until he makes that strike. And his War Scroll rewards you to play that way, which is what I really enjoy from Manfred, as much as people boo Manfred and do not like him.
Yeah, definitely. He very much plays that way. He's pretty much the jack of all trades, Mortark, really. He's good at a bit of everything, but he doesn't specialize in one area. But yeah, he's a great fighter. He's a great spellcaster. He's very, very reliable. He himself, he's best probably used in a very aggressive sort of Soulblight army. Maybe lots of Vargeist in particular. He works really well with them.
I always partnered him with a vampire. I always partnered him with a vampire lord on Zombie Dragon, because that still allows me to have the big anvil, and it allows me to then manipulate the board with Manfred and play around elsewhere.
That's right. Play your strengths, overwhelming force. But yeah, you're exactly right.
Next up, we've got, what do we have here? We've got what appears to be Vordry, but I imagine this is not Vordry.
Well, what you've got on the screen now is actually three different types of builds for vampire lords in your army. So on the far left, you've got your vampire lord on Zombie Dragon. He's probably something that you'll see in most Soulblight armies, if not most Legions of Nagash armies. He's just a killing machine. The Zombie Dragon makes him a little bit more durable, a bit more killy. In the middle there, you've got one of my conversions, but that represents the Vampire Lord on a Nightmare.
Yeah.
And then you've got on the far right is a vampire with wings, like the Flying Horror. And it just goes to show, you can have a bit of variety of vampire heroes in the army as well, with the previous three and the three that you've got on the screen now.
I know with the person that the flying lady vampire there, that is the old Isabella von Cast Iron sculpt from Fantasy Battles. What I had done was I didn't want wings on my flying vampire. I didn't want my vampire on a horse either. So what I had done is I'd actually cut up about 1/3 of a flying stand, and I try to make it levitate. Because to me, vampires don't fly because of wings. They fly with telepathy, and they fly with that type of psionic powers. So for me, I wanted that kind of levitation type vampire, which is again another way that you can build the army that is in your mind as opposed to what's being dictated to you. And no one's ever said anything no one's ever said to me, he's not flying, he's got no wings. Well, I've got a story. Okay, cool. People are pretty good about this.
That's right. It's the whole supernatural fly thing. How many movies and books have you read where they can just fly on their own accord, they don't need wings necessarily? The other one is another one I like to use as a vampire with flight is the old Conrad von Karstein model with the two swords above his head. He's got bats all around him. I like to think that he bursts into a cloud of bats and reforms. So there's a few ideas that you can do if you don't have a vampire with a big pair of wings stuck on him. I've got a few different models to represent that, but those wings in particular I used for that conversion are the K wings from the Daughters of Cain. I thought they were perfect for that, the right size. Instead of gluing her arms on, just put the wings in the same place and away you go.
I love it. No, it's great. No, I really like it. And again, it just shows you how much creativity is in your mind of a vampire. I've still got some of the older kits, like the old Lamian kit, where there used to be a Lamian vampire on foot, and there used to be on a steed, and she's got like a little cat with her. So actually, you gave her to me, Deke. You actually gave her to me, but there are a lot of cool models that you can tap into to reflect your style of Soulblight, which brings us to probably the best unit in this army, which is
the Bloodlines. Yeah, I don't know the best, but they're definitely my favorite.
They're my favorite too, so that must make it the best.
Totally. Yep. Yeah. Blood Knights are probably your best rank and file unit for a Soulblight army. Now, normally you'd see them as your elite shock infantry, shock cavalry, and like a Legion of Nagash, but in a Soulblight army, these guys, as well as Vargeist, are your battle line. Now, where Blood Knights are quite good is they've, unlike most undead, they've actually got a pretty good armor save. They've got a four up save base. If the enemy has no rend at all, they end up with a 3-up save. They bucket load of attacks, lots of damage on the charge. But narrative wise, they're the vampire retainers of your vampire lords. They're the vampire household knights. There's in a bit of the lore, they'll roam the mortal realms on basically like a dark quest, honing their martial prowess over the centuries, trying to seek that martial perfection. One of the stories that I think is quite cool in the Legions of Nagash book is a unit of knights of blood knights might ride into a village that's being beset by some monster or beastman or whatever. We've got that dark nobility to them. They'll agree to rid the village or the town of threat. They'll slay the beast or the monster or whatever. But then when it comes to payment, they'll want the blood of maybe a few innocent villagers as payment to quench their thirst, sort of thing.
Mm.
So it's pretty cool.
After a hard day of work, people like to drink like a beer. This is essentially their beer. It's like, cool, I want to drink your blood. I want to drink your blood.
Right. Well, the questing knights or the noble knights would normally come back. You'd throw them a big feast, wouldn't you? Well, you might throw them a few brothers instead.
The blood feast.
Yeah, that's right.
Next thing is, and by the way, a lot of these models are very close to the stock models that Games Workshop produced, but Deke has gone on and converted and pulled together from different kits. And I think it's lovely that you can bring your own flavor, and this is just one of the many ways that you can demonstrate your army. So what do we got here?
That's right. There's a lot of those units. Just it's always good just to add your own little touch to it. Make it look a little bit different to everyone else's. But on the screen there, what we've got in the center is actually a Bloodseeker Palanquin, and on the left and the right, it's the same model. It's a Coven Throne. Now they look very similar to each other. Now, basically, narrative-wise, the middle one there, the Bloodseeker Palanquin, it's the vampire riding in that is a sanguinarch. She's all about the finest vintage of blood. So she's always out on the battlefield in the most bloodiest areas, trying to collect as much blood as possible, and she's sampling all the different vintages of blood that are spilt on the battlefield in a goblet. And she basically drives the rest of the Soulblight nearby into a bit of a blood frenzy. The Coven Throne itself, as we're talking about, there's many different types of vampires. The Coven Throne, it basically has a vampire noble lady or a queen who, she's not going to slog it through the mud on foot or ride a stinking, rotting beast.
Yuck.
Instead, what she does, she actually has her own throne, lifted aloft by like a bunch of spirits and ghosts. And on her throne, she's got 2 handmaidens that will help her scry the future in like a big bowl of blood. So they're very, very, very cool looking models in that regard, and the story sort of matches what they look like as well. They're very cool. On the battlefield, they're pretty great to use as well, especially the Coven Throne. It can muck up your enemy with a special command ability that she's got, Beguile. Basically, she bewitches them, and they're unable to strike against her, and she can just hack away at them at will.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
They're very cool. And I saw that you put on a a regular vampire from just a vampire on foot, and I saw you put her on top of the Palanquin as well. So, or maybe it was the Coven Throne. So again,
that was
do your thing.
Bloodseeker Palanquin. That one. That was actually the old, or the same Isabella model that we were talking about before with the wings.
With the wings, yeah.
She's got a goblet in her hands. I thought it was ideal. She's just taken a scoop of blood from her big bowl of her vintage that's sitting on the throne there. So I thought it was very appropriate.
Some of my favorites, because some of these are very older style sculpts. I have my alternatives on the bat swarms that I really like. But what are the difference here between these two bats?
So what you're looking at there, you got fell bats and you got bat swarms. They're some of the other units that you'll find in a Soulblight army. Fellbats Fellbats and bat swarms, as I mentioned before, they're two of your only summonable units that you've actually got in your army, in a Soulblight allegiance anyway. So they're able to be healed by your heroes nearby. Now, bat swarms, they can be very useful in your army. They're very fast. So especially if you use them with the Swift Death Bloodline ability, they would get even faster. They would get across the board very quickly. They've actually got a 12-inch bubble that stops or makes it harder for the enemy to hit you. -1 to hit for any enemy. Yeah, -1 for their shooting. Yeah. Makes it very hard for them to hit you in the shooting phase. So they're very useful.
Five wounds apiece, right? Like a base has 5 wounds.
Yeah, 5 wounds apiece.
Bravery 10.
5 attacks each. And a hit on 5s, wound on 5s. They're not the best fighters, but what's cool about them is maybe you've inflicted 4 wounds on a bat swarm. As soon as they inflict a single wound on an enemy, the base heals right back up to full strength. So very, very hard to get rid of. And they're 80 points for 2 bases for 10 wounds. That's not bad. It's pretty cool.
Good for holding home objectives. Good for annoying your opponent or baiting them. I know with my bat swarms, I went out and got the Lord of the Rings bat swarm, which I thought was really cool. I know you've gone out and kit bashed this from a particular Lord of the Rings model. Was it Lord of the Rings?
No, these ones are a different company. These are the Bones Ralpatha bat swarm. I do have those ones that you were talking about. I just moved recently and couldn't find them.
That's all right.
But yeah, I've got a bit of variety. It's always good to have some different models. But
and then you got the Fellbats.
The Fellbats themselves as well. So they're very cool as well. They're a lot of people will put these guys down, but I think they're very underrated. They're super fast. You put them in there again with the Swift Death Bloodline ability. I think they become movement 14, so super fast then. They got 3 wounds apiece. What's really cool about them as well is as soon as they inflict a wound on an enemy model, actually not necessarily them, as long as an enemy model is slain within 6 inches of them, the unit doubles their attacks for the rest of the game. So each model ends up with six attacks each, 4s and 4s. They're a nice, fast little screen for a Soulblight army without having to ally in anything. You'd be taking these guys mainly for their speed. So yeah, I've had a few games with these guys, and they just got where they need to be, and it's great for overwhelming the smaller infantry units or maybe attacking a lone character. But as I said, they're really particularly good as a screen for your Soulblight.
The final page we've got is.
We've spoken. We've got a Fellbat and just one of the Castellans, the Blood Knight champions, in the middle there. But one thing we haven't spoken about yet is the Vargeist. Now, the Vargeist, that's on the far right. They're actually your other battle line unit for this allegiance. I quite rate these guys. They're very reliable. Where Blood Knights, they've got a good armor save, fair few attacks, but unless they're charging, they're only going to be doing 1 damage each. On the charge, Blood Knight's really good. They do D3 damage on the charge, but if they're charged or any combat rounds after that, only doing 1 damage. Where Vargeist, they've got 3 attacks each. hitting on threes, winning on threes, always doing 2 damage a pop. So they're great at absolutely ripping through infantry horde units.
So they're more consistent.
And
like you're not relying on the charge to get the damage
that's
out.
right. Yeah, you can just get them into combat and leave them and and just let them go to town on the rank and file. You probably want to run a bigger unit, maybe 6 of these. And where they're really good is every time you slay an enemy model, you get to roll another dice on a 6 to get an extra attack again, and that could do another 2 damage. And yeah, they're very nasty, great for clearing out hordes. They're also very fast. They're very durable, 4 wounds a pop, so they're very, very tough. Narrative-wise, you've got some cool lore and background. A Vargeist is created when a vampire is denied blood for too long. The inner beast, the bestial sort of hunger inside of them takes over, and they basically transform into this like ginormous bat monster. Any sort of semblance at sort of humanity is gone and stripped away, and you're just left with the beast inside. What's cool is in the realm of beasts in Gur, there's actually a dynasty of Soulblight that actually worship the Vargeist. They think it's actually a higher self of vampire. They will ascend to becoming a Vargeist, and what they'll do, they'll ritualistically deny themselves blood. They'll chain up the individuals, deny them blood, and eventually, when they're strong enough and they've transformed enough, they'll burst free, fall into the pool of blood, and emerge as one of these Vargeists. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And again, as we were saying before, a bit of opportunity to sort of convert or theme one of your Soulblight armies from a particular realm, like a realm of beast. You could go with that theme and have a very bestial looking vampire army.
Yeah, and I can see that you've gone with like a charcoal color as opposed to maybe a more skin color, or maybe, we probably see more alternative colors in the Flesh Eater courts with their type of Vargeist, which we know as the Crypt Flayer. But again, bring out your own story, bring out your narrative, bring out your realm as well. Like, what does a Vargeist or any of these armies look like? You mentioned the Realm of Light, and how they're uncomfortable, but not necessarily get burnt like the traditional vampires. What does that look like, and how do they counteract that? Maybe it is with darker skin, maybe it is with I don't know. You tell me your narrative, and I think that's the exciting piece.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else you want to add to this? I think, from my side of the fence, these are very lovely models. I love what you've done with the stock models that you get from Games Workshop, and then you've really built upon it. And, you don't have to if you don't want to. You can keep to the box art, but there is so much conversion opportunity, as well as it'll just look great, because not a lot of people are running Soulblight. Your army will really stand out. Yeah,
it's great. Another one of the reasons why maybe actually fielding a Soulblight army is it's one of those armies you don't see very often. So if you want to dare to be different and field a cool army that sort of that not many other people really see, well, that's your chance to do it with that army, with that allegiance.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. I think I've been very supportive and very positive of it because it's something different. And a lot of Death players, moved from Legions of Nagash over to into OBR, which is a little bit of same, but a little bit different. This is keeping within Legions of Nagash and is very different. And I know you and I have talked a lot extensively in leading up to this episode, where we've talked about ways that you can really make your army, and using some of the other kits that are sitting outside of Legions of Nagash to make your own. I think for me, that's the exciting part, is that you really can make your own if you put in the time. Like, don't just go buy some models off eBay and try to tell me they're vampires. There's an opportunity to kit bash, convert, and really build upon a story.
Yeah, 100%. Like we were just talking about Blood Knights just before, and like one of the best ways, like if you don't want to buy the stock models of Blood Knights, which in my opinion they're actually fantastic models, they're great. But for pretty much the same price, you could buy a start collecting Slaves to Darkness box, the newest start collecting box for Slaves to Darkness, and you could actually convert up those 5 plastic Chaos Knights in there. file away or clip away some of those chaos symbols. If you've bought a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, you can actually use some of your spare parts left over from that to help convert them up. There's actually Games Workshop through their web terminal or online, they actually sell a death upgrade pack, which is a whole bunch of very Soulblight looking shields, and you've got a Soulblight looking banner there as well with your vampiric iconography.
I think
that would be a great way to convert them up.
The Slaves to Darkness is a really good call out, because the biggest barrier to entry from what I've seen is that the Soulblight Blood Knights are fine cast, they're metal. You probably know
used to
better.
be metal. They're now, they used to be metal. They're now a resin kit.
But they're expensive. But they're being resin is fine. Like, I have a lot of Forge World resin. I have a lot of resin. I've never really had a problem with resin. It was the cost that kept people away. And these new Chaos Knights are freaking awesome. And the fact that you can convert them up, I know I've seen some people who have been looking for different, like, various heads. Things like the tree revs from Sylvaneth have a very kind of vampiric.
They're great.
They're very vampiric head. I know I've gone out and gotten some of the Deepkin heads as well. Some of them have, again, that very pointy-eared, bald head, that kind of vampiric kind of style, and again go well with the pale tones.
Hey, maybe your army used to be, maybe your Vampire Lord and your Blood Knights used to be chaos worshippers, and they've been turned into vampires themselves, so they might have like some of their armor still hinting at their original origins, but they now pay a fealty to Nagash as opposed to any sort of chaos god. So
yeah, I love it. There's absolutely no reason why they couldn't. You could probably go grab some like Demigryph shields if your narrative was a part of the Free Cities, or there's a lot of opportunity to make your own story. Speaking of making your own, and I wanted to bring this up, was you were very kind to build a list for me, because I said to you, how do you build a Soulblight list? How do I put this all together? And obviously there's 4 different bloodlines that I can tap into, and I can build around certain things. But like, what's a good starting point? And you have run this quite often. You've done quite well at Sydney GT. I know you ran Soulblight there. You've run things at Moab. You've run Soulblight at various different like little one-day tournaments. You've put the hard yards in with Soulblight. So I wanted to know, what's the framework that you're putting your army in, and then maybe is there any variances or things to consider, and maybe we'll go through your list if that's all right with you.
Yeah, that's fine. Like when we tackle this list, I basically wanted to explain, like, I did it in 2 parts. I want to talk to you about it based on how it will perform on the battlefield, but also like how one might also start collecting a Soulblight army as well, where to start with your models. Now, this is a 2,000 point list that I've put forward to you. This is very much something very similar to what I would even take to like a competitive event or just on a normal tabletop, like a normal game. But basically, I started this off by building up a first 1,000 points. So if you're a beginner, focus on a smaller point limit, aim for 1,000 points. Now, the best way to do this is grab yourself a Flesh Eater Court Start Collecting box, because this kit also makes a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, or Vordre on his Zombie Dragon. And you can also create 3 Vargeist out of it as well. You're going to have leftover ghouls. You can use them for conversions, whatever. Maybe a future army project, but it's still cheaper for you to pick up this Start Collecting than buying both those models separarely. So
if you did the maths,
who cares?
If you did the maths, it was probably 3 ghouls. If you went and bought the Vargeist and the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon independently, it probably comes to a very similar price tag. So you're basically buying 2, get 1 free. So it's probably no reason why you wouldn't go out and buy this Start Collecting box. It is great value for money. And who knows, maybe you want to start Flesh Eater Courts down the track with and have a start with a bunch of ghouls.
Yeah, like even under like what I talk about with Australian prices, like you're actually paying $15 less for both those models, and you get a unit of ghouls out of it. So
there you go. You're saving money by taking more models.
Yeah, no, it's
Worst
great.
case scenario, use it for kit bashing on the bases, like whatever.
That's right. Oh, yeah, that's it. Some of those heads you could even get away using them for other vampire heads and stuff. So,
so we've started off with the allegiance of Soulblight, and we've chosen the mortal realms of Shyish with the Bloodline of Swift Death, which is our +2 to movement.
Correct. Yep. So we've got our zombie dragon. We've got 3 Vargeist. Now for your first 1,000 points, I'd add on to that by adding another 3 Vargeist and a unit of Blood Knights, and that will give you close to your first 1,000 points. And then expanding on that, we can sort of go through the list a bit more now.
Yeah, let's go through the list.
Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon. Now, what I've given him, you just read out the Bloodline ability, Swift Death, so that allows him +2 the move army wide,
and everyone flies.
Everyone flies. Yep. So that's including your Blood Knights and stuff as well. So Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon. He's the general. His command trait is Mistform. That's the one that allows him to retreat and charge. Now, to get the best use out of this as well, give him the lance. That way, he actually gets the extra damage on the charge as well. So you're most likely to get more charges out of it, more damage out of this command ability as well. At the top there, you'll see that I've actually listed my army as originating from Shyish, the Realm of Death. And what that does is it gives me access to the Ethereal Amulet, which is one of the Shyish artifacts from the Malign Sorcery book.
It's actually, according to all the data and the shows that I've been doing, it's actually the second most chosen artifact in the entire game outside of Godbone Armor. So it is a very popular artifact, not just for death, but also for your Stonehorns, your Frostlord or Stonehorns, your Mega Boss or Maw Crusher. But the reason why it's really popular, Deke, is
it gives you for your Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon in particular, 3-up save that ignores any sort of modifiers whatsoever. So you always, sorry.
No, I was just saying to rewind it back, you're going to have a 3-up armor save that can't be rendered. Then you have a 6-up armor save with that Deathless, or as you guys have called it, you've called it the Deathless Thralls.
Deathless Thralls. Yep.
So straight up, you've got you've got a really good regular bunch of saves, and then you've got something else that goes with that Death Lance and Shield that a lot of people forget. And when I was learning to play Death, I kept forgetting about this until I got a token, and that is the Chalice.
Yep, the Chalice. So your Vampire Lords and your Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, 1 use only in your hero phase. You can take a drink from your Chalice, and it actually heals D6 wounds that you've suffered previously in the game. As I said, it's 1 use only, but it's a cheeky way to heal back some wounds very quickly. It's also worth noting as well that the Vampire Lord has also got a special ability called the Hunger. So if he slays a model in combat, he automatically heals a wound in the hero phase as well. At the end of that combat phase.
And it's probably worth noting as well is that the Soulblight in general gets this access to the spell lore, the lore of the vampires. So being vampires, you get access to the lore of the vampires. And I can see you've taken the Pinions, which is a very popular spell with the Vampire Lords on Zombie Dragons for a particular reason.
Yeah, it actually adds +5 to your move. And if you're lucky enough to roll a natural 9+, it doubles that. So it gives you +10 to your move. Now, where this synergizes really well with this character in particular is you've got Mistform where you can retreat and charge. So this also goes well with Swift Death as well, +2 to your move. So you can actually get quite a large range of movement from this to actually get away from that combat and reposition yourself on the battlefield. So yeah, very, very useful to get, because Age of Sigmar as a game, it's all about movement, getting where you need to be, positioning yourself in the best spot, ready to do the most damage. And that's why I've gone for that spell in particular for him.
Next up, you've got Neff Errata, which is the Mortarch of Blood.
Yes, so she's been chosen to run with this list. She basically is your only, or she and Manfred actually are your only 2 options to get the lore of death mages in your army. Now, Neff Errata and Manfred, they're actually Mortarks. They're the Gash's generals, and that they've got the Death Lord keyword. And in your spell laws, it actually says that Death Lords can freely pick either Lore of Vampires or Lore of the Death Mages. So with her, I would usually take in this sort of army list Fading Vigor, where it actually removes, from memory, it removes an attack from the enemy and actually reduces their charge range as well.
To one dice, is it? It's a one dice charge?
One dice, yeah. So very useful. Especially in a Soulblight army, if you've got lots of Blood Knights, you are the one that wants to be doing the charging. You don't want to be charged. So, yeah, very useful in that particular area.
And Neff Errata's command ability is friggin' incredible.
She's great all round for Soulblight because her command ability is a -1 to hit bubble of 15 inches. It's actually one of the few command abilities that you can actually use multiple times. So if you've got 2 command points or 3 command points, you can spend those and make it a -3 to hit bubble around her. So very great, very good for keeping your stuff alive. As I said, your army is very elite, so it's also very small. You do have lots of wounds, but anything that you can use to help them stay alive is very useful. In particular, you've got armies like Kharadron Overlords, lots of shooting. So those minuses to hit are going to come very in handy. And while we're talking about Kharadrons, actually, a reason why Swift Death is also a good one to take as well is the Kharadron Overlords, for a lot of their vessels, they actually have a disengage rule where they can leave combat, go high, drop down again anywhere on the board and still shoot. Giving Blood Knights and everything in your army the fly special rule means that they can't shoot after they disengage. That's going to be very important for keeping your army alive against that particular faction. So the other thing with Neff Errata as well, she's got a great spell, Dark Mist. And if you're running a very big unit of Blood Knights, maybe a unit of 5 or 10 for a big unit, it's going to be very useful because they're going to ignore any rend. The other part of that spell, it allows them to fly. So if you weren't taking Swift Death, it's also very useful to put on them. But having a unit of Blood Knights that ignores rend, especially with all those Ossiarch Bone Reaper armies out there with the Petrifex, that's gonna come very handy. We've got a Vampire Lord on now and a Nightmare. Again, he's going to benefit from the fly special rule of Swift Death, so the Nightmare just gives him 2 extra attacks. Why not?
Yeah. If you just took a regular flying Vampire Lord, 1, it already flies if you're going with Swift Death. 2, the horse is going to get attacks. 3, the base size is a little bit bigger as well. So if you've got like an ability that you want to be able to put onto a unit, you probably get a half an inch or an extra inch because of the base size being longer than a flying regular Vampire Lord.
Well, that's exactly right, which is something I was going to go into now, is you've actually got a really cool command ability from the Vampire Lord, and his ability is to give a death unit within 15 inches +1 to all their melee attacks. So unit of Blood Knights, unit of Vargeist, they're already pretty deadly, already got lots of attacks. So extra attack doing extra damage again, that's going to be very awesome.
Set yourself up with a charge, get a +1 to attack. You've got all the buffs to do really well when you do charge and do a whole bunch of damage. So nice little combination.
Having that extra hero in there as well is going to be great for providing you with that extra Deathless Thrall save, the 6-up, ignore the damage roll after your armor saves. Very important for this army.
And your Vampire Lord on foot, your Vampire Lord on Nightmare is also coming with a Chalice as well, right? So they get that once per game heal.
Yes, so he can also heal the D6 wounds as well. 1 use only. Quite a few less wounds than your Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, so you got to make sure you make the most out of it when you can. Otherwise, you might not get a chance to use it at all. So if you've taken 1 or 2 wounds and you have the opportunity, just use it. Because you want to keep him alive. And then we're going to go into the units that we've got there. Now I've got 2 units of 5 Blood Knights and 6 Vargeists to make up your 3 compulsory battle line units for the army. Now, the 2 units of 5 Blood Knights are going to be great. Blood Knights are great to be used on the charge. They do the extra damage when they charge in. I like to, with the 2 units of 5, I like to sort of charge a unit in, and then next opportunity they get to disengage with those, and then charge in with the second unit. That way they can keep getting the most out of the different charges, or of the damage from their charges. 6 Vargeist as well. Now, they're probably their one weakness is they don't have the armor save of the Blood Knights. They've only got a 5-up save.
They're a bit of a glass cannon. They're a bit of a glass cannon. They don't take a hit very well.
That's right. But in saying that, though, they do have 4 wounds each, so they've got an extra wound than the Blood Knights. And overall, I think they're a little bit more. Overall, I think they hit a bit harder because they're 2 damage a pop. 3 attacks each actually does, a fair bit of damage. And where they're best being used, throw them into a horde unit that's maybe got one models made up of 1 wound, and they'll just absolutely shred that unit. If you can, maybe throw your Dark Mist on them if you get the opportunity. But they'll be best used, best to use the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon's Dread Knight command ability to allow them to re-roll their hits, just so they can just shred the absolute hell out of the unit. They've actually got a rule: every time they slay a model, you roll an additional dice, and on a 6, they actually gain an extra attack, and that's potentially another 2 damage that you do from there. Now, they don't get any extra attacks after that. As you can see, you can get a fair bit of damage out of them.
And you can obviously
faster than your Blood Knights as well.
And you can always go in like the Dragon Warrior kind of build as well, getting the reroll ones when they charge. So, there are other optimal ways to kind of get the most out of your Vargeist.
Yeah, true. Yep. Yeah, that's another option to go with that. Now, one of the things you'll notice at the bottom of that armlet, I've actually got some allies in there. Now, where Soulblight sort of struggle is they're a very elite army, very small sort of army. You don't want to have your units of Blood Knights or Vargeist sitting on your backfield on an objective. You don't want them camping on objectives. You don't want them to be playing defensively. You want to get in there. You want to charge. You want to do as much damage as possible. You also don't have a lot of screening units other than like Fellbats. And what I think is a good option to ally in, what I've got here is Chain Rasp. I've got a unit of 20 and of 10. They're great for screening your army during deployment. Soulblight actually, unfortunately, don't have access to any battalions at all. So more often than not, you're actually going to be probably being made to go first. You'll be outdropped, and your opponent will have the choice of going first or second. So you just want to make sure that your army is screened properly with those Chain Rasp. They also have the Fly ability built into their own War Scroll. And because they're a Night Haunt unit, they actually ignore armor save modifiers as well and have a 5-up save. And they're not too shabby in combat as well. They're hit on 4 wounded, 4 2 attacks, but if they've got more than 10 models in their unit, they can actually reroll 1s to wound as well. So they're pretty groovy. They're also great for just holding or contesting objectives on the battlefield as well. Your units are only like units of 5 or 6. They're not huge horde units. So that unit of 10 or that unit of 20 Chain Rasp is going to be very handy for capturing those objectives from the enemy. Your Blood Knights or your Vargeist get in there, actually smash the crap out of the foe, reduce their numbers whilst your Chain Rasp are in there holding onto those objectives. Now, worth noting as well that they don't actually get a Deathless save because they're allies.
That's correct.
Get access to the Deathless Thralls. And another reason why I went with Chain Rasp, because they don't have access to that, their 5-up save that ignores Rend sort of makes up for that. It makes them a little bit more durable as well. It's also worth noting they're a summonable death unit because although they're allies, your Vampire Lords, Neff Errata, and your Vampire Lord Zombie Dragon, they will also heal the units as well with your Deathless Invocation rule as well. So they can get healed.
That's a great call. So if you can't use your summonable stuff on your Blood Knights and your Vargeist, you've still got a place to regenerate through summoning, which is a great call. Alternatively, obviously, if you're looking for screening and fast units, we've already talked about the Bat Swarms, we've talked about the Fellbats, but I like the shout and tapping into the Chain Rasps. Because it will give you bodies, it will give you some board control. You're going to be able to move around the board pretty quickly with some speed, and they've got small bases as well, so they're likely not to get in the way of your Blood Knights and your Vargeist, which is what you want to essentially leap over and wreck face with your opponent.
Well, that's right. It works well with the synergy of the Swift Death as well. All your Blood Knights have got fly, so they can just ride over the top of them when you've used it as a screen anyway.
Yeah. So you've also walked away with an extra command point and chromatic cogs. So why would you take an extra command point, and what's the idea with cogs?
Okay, the extra command point is always very important with Soulblight. In particular, you want to make sure that your Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, he hits as hard as he can when he's in combat. The Vampire Lord notoriously will most of the time will hit everything. The Zombie Dragon notoriously will tend to fluff some of its attacks and miss, as most of its attacks hit on fours. Rerolling the hit will just help mitigate some of those misses and do a hell of a lot more damage. Having that extra command point gives you the option to maybe double tap, put that on another unit in your army, or maybe use Neff Errata's or the Vampire Lord's ability as well. If you're new to Age of Sigmar in general, buying a command point, you also earn or gain a command point every hero phase as well. So you can save them up and bank them, or you can use them right away. But making sure you use those command abilities in the Soulblight army to make sure your army hits as hard as possible when it gets the opportunity. Because when you hit, you need to make sure you hit hard and as much damage as possible.
Reminds me of my Gloomspite gets. There's a lot of effort to set up this perfect charge, and the minute that you fail a charge, your whole army potentially becomes vulnerable. So having those extra command points and obviously mitigating it with chromatic cogs is going to put you in a better position to charge, and you're going to reduce the chances of failing that charge. So I like both, and it sounds like you guys are pretty command point hungry. When you look at, Neff Errata's ability, the Vampire Lord's ability, swap out Neff Errata for Manfred. Manfred has a pretty good command ability as well. So you guys are pretty hungry for command points, so I can see why you would take one up your sleeve, knowing that you can't get access to a battalion as well.
Well, as I said before, like Neff Errata being able to tap as many her command ability as many times as she has command points is very useful. So having that extra one and using it at the right time, making your all opponents enemy models within 15 inches, -1, -2, maybe -3 to hit is going to be very annoying for your enemy. And you also see that I've got the Chromatic Cogs as the endless spell. Again, this synergizes really well with the list I've built. +2 to your move and +2 to your charge. With Chromatic Cogs board wide. Be very careful though; it does give that to your opponent, so use it wisely. But in particular, the +2 to your charge works really well with your Blood Knights, because the Blood Knight musician, what it actually does is regardless what you roll, your minimum charge roll will always be a 6. So with Chromatic Cogs, the minimum charge roll will always be an 8. So very handy. Yeah, very handy indeed.
That's pretty nice. Yeah, and because you don't have any teleporting and things like that, you don't have to be worrying about that 9-inch bubble. So an 8-inch charge, a guaranteed 8-inch charge, is pretty special, especially if you're able to manipulate the board and use that 8-inch charge in combination of flying to be able to get in, to maybe to jump screens and hit the squishy kind of underbelly that is the characters or the buff supporting units, as opposed to hitting like the wall of chaff.
As well as you combine that with Neff Errata, like Swift Death and Chromatic Cogs with Neff Errata, she's got a 20-inch move. So you can just fly her right where she needs to be and just use all your command abilities and bang, everything in your army enemy army is -2, -3 to hit. And that's going to suck for them.
Even -1, -1, -2, it's very hard. So I know how I used to frustrate a heap of people with my netters from Gits. So that's just not a -1.
You can appreciate that.
Yeah, like you just throw down two command points to get a double, a -2. Then all of a sudden, that's annoying.
That's right. So like in general, like Soulblight in general, it's a very fun army to play. It hits very hard. If you're an aggressive player and you like your combat, you like your units and your heroes just chewing through enemy models, it's a very awesome army. If you play Corn, you'll probably enjoy Soulblight. You just got to be very careful that you don't overstep your army. It's an objective game. Play your objectives. Don't charge everything in at once, because you're only going to be able to fight with the unit first, and then they're going to come back at one of your very elite, very small units, and your hammer is then going to be less effective because you're going to have less models striking.
There's a point of being too aggressive or being over aggressive, and then you're stuck in combat and it's not good. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And saying that as well, like unfortunately, this doesn't worry me. But I've never actually taken first place or second place. I haven't podiumed at a tournament. I've gone to a few of the big ones as well. But generally, I always walk away with a pretty good win ratio with the Soulblight as well. Like, I think my first time I took them to Moab a few years ago, it was 4 wins, 1 loss.
4-1. That was a team. That was a teams event, but you were 4-1. But you've always kind of averaged at least a 3-2 with Soulblight, which is a sweet spot. If you're winning more than you're losing, if you are 3-2, that's a healthy spot.
Well, that was last GT as well. Took Soulblight, and that was 3-2 as well. The only 2 games I lost were against Slanesh as well, and we all know how nasty they can be. But yeah, so they can go all right. You just got to play them well, and you know what your units are capable of, and knowing what your enemy can do as well is knowledge is power, and that's half the battle,
Yeah, look, like I think we both can be honest here and say that Soulblight is not the new meta. It is not the new Seraphon. It's not the new OBR Petrifix Elite. It's not Zench with Change Host with all the demons. It's a good, solid army that is probably going to be about a 50% win rate, somewhere between 45 and 55% win rate. It's going to be up to the general to kind of pilot it. Yes, it can go 4 wins. It's probably going to be taking a lot of time to practice and prepare and learn the strengths and weaknesses, but it's going to be an army that you're going to have fun with. You're going to learn a lot. It's going to look unique on the table, and it's a nice way to play Death without playing the Horde Death that Death is known for.
Yeah, that's right. You'll actually finish your games at tournaments, which is something to be said with Soulblight. But in general as well, they're just a lot of fun. Take them because you want to play them, not because you want to win. But in saying that, one of the things you might have up your sleeve is very rare to see a pure Soulblight army. So chances, like some of those top players, they might not know what your army does that well. You might take them unexpectedly and get them that way. Who knows? It's just it's a great army to use in general.
It's very unique. It's very different. To kind of close out the show, we kind of alluded to this, and I'd love just to know any more thoughts. So we talked about starting a Soulblight army, and you've given some pretty practical advice to start up a 1K force. We talked about the start collecting box, which is Flesh Eater Courts. It gives us some really good value for the Vampire Lord and on Zombie Dragon, as well as the Vargeist. We've talked about things like the Chaos Knights in the start collecting box for Chaos, and obviously shaving those kits down. We've talked about the Vampire upgrade sprue that's available from Games Workshop. We've kind of talked about some other things. What other hints, tips, tricks do you have for building Soulblight? I guess is where I want to end that question.
Just think about what theme you want to go for, what realm you want it to be from. because Death in general is one of those armies that you can actually. It's a converted army. You can go down with it, but as I said, I do. Just again, this is probably the best way to kick off the army. Flesh Eater Court, start collecting bots. Add an extra box of Vargeist to that box. Get yourself 5 Blood Knights. That's your 1,000 points. From there, add an extra 5 Blood Knights, and get yourself 30 Chain Rasp. Chain Rasp are pretty easy to come by, especially if you've picked up the Warhammer Age of Sigmar Soul Wars box. Yeah. And they've got a few other boxes as well that you can pick up that are easily bulk that out as well. A lot of the Nighthaunt units are great to take as allies for Soulblight as well. So don't think that any of those are a waste as well. Just make up your list, muck around with it, see what you want to come up with. But it's actually a smaller army, so you're not sitting there trying to pack up a horde of models. You can, feel like you're getting somewhere with this army when you're painting it hobby-wise,
Yeah, and the great thing as well is that
through 1,000 models,
You're also, like, for me, you're not stuck to a Soulblight army. So now that you've got Neff Errata, you've got Manfred, you've got some Blood Knights, you've got some Vargeist, these guys perfectly fit into a Legion of Night or a Legion of Blood list.
It goes the other way. If you start with Soulblight, you can break out into one of the other legions. Yeah, easily.
Or vice versa. I'm sure if you're a Legions player right now and you're looking at your model range and you're like, I probably have enough. I might not have the Blood Knights, or I might be missing, X or Y, but existing Legions players probably have enough, or very close to enough, to get into a Soulblight list. And I know for me personally, I would probably prefer to go the Chaos Knight route over the traditional Blood Knights, only because of the conversion opportunity. It allows me to add my own sprues, my bits, and my kits to make something special. Cool. I think Deke's screen might have frozen, but for me, if I just while I talk and Deke amazingly looks frozen. For me, the Soulblight is a very cool army, and I'm very fortunate that we've had Deke for 90 minutes talking about Soulblight, almost like perfect wrap up. And think about Soulblight, think about the way that it's built, look at the ways that Deke has kind of shared with us some hints, tips, and tricks. I would love to see, if you are writing Soulblight, what's your story, what's your narrative. If you are enjoying this show, as always, as every YouTuber probably has ever said since the dawn of time, press the like button, give me a comment, let me know how you're building your list, how you've run your list, how you're converting up your vampires in the mortal realms, where exactly in the mortal realms are they, and how have you made those vampires reflective of Gairan, Shaiish, Shaman, whatever realm you're from. So that's it from now, guys. I would like to thank Deke, who unfortunately has had to drop off for technology challenges. And I look forward to hearing from you guys. Get it back in there, rolling lots of sixes. Until next time,